3. A live podcast sponsored by the Marin Fire History Group. All about the history of the fire service in Marin County, California. And now your host, retired Fire Chief Bill Lellis.
Good morning, this is Paul Smith representing the Marin County Fire Chiefs Association Fire History website. This morning I have with me Ken Masuko, formerly with the County of Marin, as he was fire chief there. And we'd like to introduce Ken this morning, and we'll chat a little bit about Ken's history, his fire history, and his personal views on today's fire service. Good morning, Ken.
Morning, Paul. It's great to be here. It's a place where I started my career back in 1973 as a Kentfield volunteer, and I'm very proud to state that, and I can't tell you how appropriate it is that I start my career here, and we do this little background on myself and my career here at the Kentfield Fire District.
Well, thanks for making time out of your schedule to meet with us. Thank you very much. Would you like to chat a little bit about how you got interested in the fire service and how you developed your fire service career?
Well, I was going to Redwood High School, and one of my best friends became a volunteer at the Kentfield Fire District. He had worked at the Shell Station down here on College Avenue, the Minto Brothers Shell Station, and a lot of the firefighters from Kentfield used that service station to fill up their cars and service them. And they asked him to be a volunteer, and he became a volunteer and just loved it, loved the camaraderie, loved the people, and loved being a firefighter. And so he said, why don't you come and join and become a volunteer firefighter? It's great for your community, and I think you'll really love the people that are involved in the fire service. So I did, and to tell you the truth, kind of fell in love with the fire service when I was a volunteer at 18 years old. And I just had some terrific mentors, and the first one that comes to mind is Bob Mariani, who just passed away. And Bob was very instrumental in my career. He was probably the first one that really embedded in my mind how important firefighter training was. And Bob's philosophy was you train until you don't have to think about the evolution, that it's embedded in your mind, and that's going to keep you safe on the fire ground. And I'll never forget that. But there was a lot of great mentors here at Kentfield. Bob Betancourt, John Landa, who was just a firefighter at that time, was very involved in the volunteer training program. Bob Lewis, who was a long-term Kentfield volunteer, became a Marin County Fire Department company officer, and then later on as a heavy equipment operator. He was very involved in the volunteer training, and those guys really helped me start my career in the fire service. And from then, I was graduated from Redwood High School. I was attending College of Marin, taking fire science classes. In 1974, I think it was around the end of summer, maybe August, September, the test for Marin County Fire Department came up. And I took it, and 2 weeks later, I was notified that I had a job. So, I really hadn't made up my mind that I wanted to become a full-time firefighter, but that kind of put me in the position of now is the time to get involved to see if I really want to be a firefighter. So I accepted the position, and November 15th, 1974, I started my career with the Marin County Fire Department.
And your experience as a Kentfield leading up to the opportunity that you started with Woodacre, correct? You were
I was assigned to A shift Woodacre with then Assistant Chief Rowan as my assistant chief, and Bob Testa as my fire captain. But prior to that, my time with Kentfield, there was a every fire department had a softball team, and I played for Kentfield at that time and got to know a lot of the firefighters throughout the county, and great camaraderie. And what I learned from that experience is that the wonderful people that were involved in the fire service back then and continue on today. So it was a very rewarding start to my career.
Good. And then you worked at Woodacre, and then how were things in Woodacre? How did they evolve through your first few years there?
So, like I said, I worked on an A shift in Woodacre, and about a year and a half later, the Marin County Fire Department had a firefighter mechanic position where you worked in the shop part-time, and I took that position. And I spent years working for my dad and his service station and garage, so I knew a little bit about mechanics, and that it was kind of a natural fit for me. And I wanted to learn more about how the fire pumps operate and how the engines operate and the equipment that we use. So it was a good time in my career to learn a little bit more about fire engines. So when I came to work for the Marin County Fire Department, you know, the high pressure pump that the county fire department used for years, that delivered 600 to 800 pounds PSI, and we were fighting wildland fires with a bean gun that had a tip on it. So with the tip, it was 11 gallons a minute. If you took the tip off, you were down to like 6 gallons a minute. And that's the nozzle that we used to fight wildland fires for years and years and years. And that was the philosophy, that high pressure was where it was at with hardline. And they had 3/4 hardline and 1/2-inch hardline. And during the early 1970s, the mid 1970s, is when County Fire actually stopped building their own fire trucks, and we went to a fire truck manufacturer as the vendor for our first 2 pieces of equipment. And we first bought an OES Type 1 on the OES spec, and then we basically developed a specification for a Type 3 wildland engine, and we took delivery of 2 of those in 1976. And I'll have to say they were kind of state-of-the-art for wildland firefighting equipment, because they were equipped with a foam application system very similar to the retardant that the planes drop. Mm-hmm. We could use that type of system. So we worked with Western Fire to develop that concept, and 2 people that were very instrumental in implementing that piece of equipment were Jim Selfridge and Bob Testa, who really took a gamble saying, here's the direction we need to go. We need to go to low pressure and use cotton jacket hose and start our simple and progressive hose lays with cotton jacket hose. So huge change for the mid.
From a hard line
to go to that concept
with a different kind of.
And we were very successful. And I can remember a fire when we first started to go to cotton jacket hose with then the fire chief Dick Pedroli, and it was right after lunch, and it was on a tough hill, and we had one engine that was capable of laying cotton jacket hose, and the rest of them were go ahead and deploying their hardline. Well, the engine with the cotton jacket hose was just making perfect time, and we surpassed the hardline hose lay by a lot, and that's when he finally came to the realization this was the direction we needed to go. So it was a big thing. Now the next big step, I mean, when you look back to the 1960s, Marin County Fire Department really wasn't involved in EMS response at all. I can remember stories where people would come in and say, hey, there's an accident down on Sir Francis Drake, and the firefighter's saying, is it on fire? No, we'll call an ambulance for you. And so, to go from then to 1977, when we sent our first 9 firefighters to paramedic school at Stanford, with the following year, 1978, we implemented our first paramedic rescue out at Point Reyes. To me, when I look at my career, the biggest advancements that we made were probably made in pre-hospital care, with the paramedicine being very, very much at the top of what we do today, and it makes up over 80% of our calls.
Right. And back in the day, out in Point Reyes, that was a huge transport time for anybody trying to get into, Marin General Hospital. That was a heck of a run. And now you're responding to these generally pretty significant wrecks out there, and able to develop pre-hospital care and keep these people alive till they could get
No,
concerned.
I can remember
Yeah.
times back in the, the mid 70s to the early 80s that, there was no helicopter transports
Right.
like there is today. And,
Right.
there was a lot of incidents where we had multiple trauma patients where, it was very normal for us to transport 2 or 3 trauma patients to then Ross General.
Ross General, right.
That was still in service, and then later on to Marin General.
Now, Ken, looking back on your fire service career, if you could turn back the hands of time, would you still consider the fire department as a career? And then, of course, you became the fire chief, and that's a different animal than a firefighter. Would you still take the same path today, looking back?
No, I would definitely still want to become a firefighter today. I mean, there's nothing else that I would want to do. My career path, it's kind of funny how you look at your career and go, would you change anything along the way? And I feel, I was really blessed to come into the Marin County Fire Department when I did, because the people that were there when I came in were just terrific firefighters. They were tough. They loved what they were doing. They really didn't care about the compensation so much, but they loved going to fires, and they loved serving their communities.
Right.
And I look at that today going, how great was that for me to get my entry into the fire service, working with these great people that just loved what they were doing.
And from my perspective, you were well respected as a fire officer, as a battalion chief through the ranks, as a well-respected fire officer in Marin County Fire Department and in the county overall, and I know in the state. Now, and I know your guys really respected you too. It's kind of a two-way street. What kind of advice would you have for the fire officers today?
Well, my philosophy was, you always treat people as you would want to be treated, and that's with a great deal of respect. As a fire chief, you're put into the position to make some tough decisions, and not every one of those decisions is going to be what the troops necessarily want to see. But I always try to make my decisions based on what's best for the organization and the people that we serve, the community members. And I think what helped me was my time on the fire engine. I never asked anybody that worked for me to do something that I wouldn't do. And I got to spend a great deal amount of my career on a fire engine, which I loved. I mean, if you talk to some of the people that work with me, they know that, what I loved doing was going out and making a tough hose lay or, going to a tough call. I mean, that's what I loved doing. And to step forward into an administrative role, I first started to get involved in politics when our Firefighters Association formed a political action committee, and I was in charge of that. So, funny story is that the association president invited the board of supervisors to our Christmas party, and he handed me a fistful of money and said, "Your job tonight is to buy the supervisors some drinks and socialize with them." And that's kind of how we got our political start. And from then, the association really befriended a lot of the Board of Supervisors members, and they, our philosophy as an association back then is what can we do politically to help the fire chief and the department out. And so I kind of liked the political end of what we did, and I liked the business end of the fire service. So the transition for me to go from battalion chief into the fire chief's position, although it was greatly different in what my responsibilities were,
Sure.
I loved, even though I had some very, very tough days as the fire chief, I loved every minute of it.
Good.
Yeah.
And it really helps when you're working with a great organization and you have some people behind to support you as well.
No, it's my success when I look at my career. The successes that I had was all related to the people that were working for me and with me. And I learned very early on that to be successful in what we do, it's all about forming relationships that are trusting relationships that you can make a deal with a handshake. And one of the things that I found out early on is how important it was to establish those relationships with people at the Civic Center. They really didn't know. They knew the Marin County Fire Department was part of the county family, but they really didn't know us that well because we were the off-campus kids.
Right.
So I did devote a lot of time into working with other departments to explain to them what our mission was, where we were at in our communities, and how we could support them as department heads also.
Yeah, I get it, because as a fire chief in Marin County, you're working with the Department of Public Works folks constantly, and with the law enforcement, the sheriff's office folks. So I could see where those type of relationships are critical, both to your folks on the street and to the management side.
Well, and I think we learned early on too how important those relationships were to our success when Chief Rowan and Chief Testa made the commitment to turn all of our vehicle replacement and maintenance over to Public Works.
There you go.
And Fahad Mansourian took that over as the Assistant Director of Public Works at the time, and really created a vehicle replacement program that we needed, that was efficient, effective, and gave us, the state-of-the-art equipment that we needed in today's fire service.
Yeah, because he understood your needs.
He understood our needs, and he was able to get the funding that we needed to do that. Where, in retrospect, every tough budget year, what we lost was the capital money for vehicle replacement. That was the first thing that was taken out of our budget. So we fell behind. And
Sure.
doing that was a bold move. I mean, and not everybody was supportive of doing that because you lose control of your vehicles. Well, that never happened, and it was a win-win for everybody.
Good. Yeah, that's a great example of interdepartmental cooperation.
True, yeah.
And on that note, Marin County Fire has a good reputation and with working together with the other Marin County fire agencies. I mean, when I was a battalion chief and a fire officer here in Kentfield, on a regular basis, we'd get together with, on A shift was Rich Testa was the battalion chief out there. So those relationships for us with your agency and the paramedics that were staffed on Rescue 40, Rescue 18, were a key component to our level of services here too.
Yeah, well, I think, Chief Rowan, and I think he learned early on that the consolidation of fire departments is a tough goal to achieve, but we can work together better, effectively and efficiently to better serve our communities without fighting over jurisdictions, that we can be one fire department even though we're individual departments. And that was his philosophy that carries on today. And
Sure.
I think we're part of the Marin County Fire Service that really today operates operationally as one fire department.
I would agree, because when we started, Ken, radio communications, for instance, in different channels, or some agency you couldn't even talk to them on the radio because they were on a frequency that you didn't carry in your fire station.
Correct. And it's nice to see these unified efforts in communications, and now, moving forward with what the Marin County Fire Chiefs want to do as far as enhancing our wildland fire preparedness is just another one of those joint efforts that are going to better serve the entire community.
Right.
And it's kind of funny when you look at the fuel break network that's proposed. The fuel break network isn't anything new to County Fire. Back in the 1940s, when it purchased its first bulldozer, they created fire roads, which
Right.
were fuel breaks.
Right.
And gave us great access into the watershed. So it's not a new concept, but it's certainly a concept that, is one of the key components to better prepare our communities for a wildland fire.
Right.
And there's a lot of other components that go along with it. But it's just funny historically, when you look at the 1940s, they were cutting fuel breaks that basically were fire roads and access into the watershed.
Yeah. Deja vu all over again.
Correct, yeah.
So some of the concepts and the techniques they used back in the 40s have come full circle, and we're looking at enhancing some of those things today.
Yeah, and there's certainly, there's environmental concerns
right.
that need to be addressed, and the public education component is going to be a key piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's taken us years to get to where we at as far as the state of our fire fuels that are out there.
Right.
It's going to take us years to unwind that.
Right.
But what we can do is make sure that we have a good system to notify our public when it's time to evacuate that works, that's very effectively, and our public knows where to go for safe refuge.
Right.
So,
Right. That's a challenge. That's our today's challenge.
yeah,
The challenges today.
absolutely. And when you look at the amount of people they just evacuated in Sonoma County for the Kincaid fire, put that into Marin, are we prepared to do that? And I think, certainly we can improve upon things that we're currently doing. And I think with the added funding of the Wildland Fire Initiative, it will certainly help.
Good. Yep. Moving forward, we'll take a look in a few years and see how we did. The future will tell us.
Absolutely.
Right. So one thing I'd like to mention too is probably 2009, 2010. You personally received a great award from the California Fire Chiefs Association. Were nominated and presented with the Fire Chief of the Year award with the Fire Chiefs Association, which is a heck of an honor. So I'm so glad to be sitting here with you today because I know you put in the work. I know you have the great attitude and the great respect of the fire chiefs of this county and the state. It's a tribute to you, Ken.
Yeah, well, thank you. And that's certainly, that night was a complete shock to me to receive that prestigious honor. It was very humbling, and I only received it because of the work of the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis, and the successes that we had. And one of the nice things about that award is knowing my peers who I've worked with for many, many years, and I got to know a lot of the Southern California fire chiefs throughout my career, and to know that I received that award was it was an honor for sure, but an extremely humbling experience. And Jim Monquest, who was the executive director of Cal Chiefs, came to me after the next morning and said, "Hey, come over here. I'm going to show you the application package that was submitted to us." And I was able to read some of the letters from colleagues, from coworkers, from members of the Board of Supervisors, and it was extremely rewarding and, like I say, very humbling experience.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, from my perspective, you deserve it. You're one of my favorite guys and one of my favorite fire chiefs. And like I say, we both started here. You started here in '74. I started here in '75, and I remember going to my very first grass fire on the back of one of the Kentfield engines with Ken Mizuko. So it was a great career for you, and you enjoyed your career, I hope, as much as I enjoyed mine. It sounds like you did.
I did, and I'll have to say to go back to my mentors who were very, just a tremendous amount of them. My knowledge of wildland fire behavior, I mean, really, I attribute that to one of our battalion chiefs, who was one of my captains, Jim Selfridge. And Jim and I worked together for years. And I can remember the first couple of fires we went to, and I couldn't understand why Jim wanted to do certain things, where he wanted to put the control lines in and all that. Then I finally got it, what his objectives were. And after the first couple of fires that we worked together, we didn't have to have a lot of conversation on what I knew what he wanted to do.
Sure.
And so it was fun for me knowing what Jim wanted to do without him telling me. And we just had a great relationship, and we had tremendous amount of fun throughout our careers. But I really learned a tremendous amount from Jim, who was a very aggressive wildland fire control officer.
Yep.
And was a great mentor to my career.
Really. And there's another guy with a fantastic reputation throughout the state on his ability to lead and fight fire.
Yeah, well, Jim, he had a great reputation statewide. Was the first member first non-CAL FIRE member to be on an incident command team for CAL FIRE. Yeah, and
That speaks volumes.
That was a big honor for him, and we all totally understood why they chose him, because of his expertise. Yeah.
Good. Do we have anything else to add, Ken?
No, I mean, I just thank you for this opportunity to come in this morning to talk about my career. But, I just extremely proud of the fire service today in Marin County and all the contributions that all the departments are making to better serve our public. And it's just unbelievable what we're doing today compared to what we did in 1974. I mean, I know we're a metrics-driven organization today because that's how we are able to justify our budgets and things like standards of cover and understanding critical tasking, what needs to be done to be successful on an incident, and be able to articulate that to the public and to our governing bodies in a way that they understand is just going to continue to make the fire service greater and greater. So.
Well, thank you very much for coming in today. We appreciate it. And on behalf of the Marin County Fire Chiefs Association and the Marin County Fire History folks, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.